and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Tony Bitzionis, and I am here with my co-host and my friend, Alex Perala. Alex, hello.
Hello, Tony.
Today we are joined by Cameron D'Ambrosi, Head of Strategic Partnerships for North America and the EU for FaceTec, and a fellow former podcast host of the State of Identity podcast. Cameron, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you just start off by giving us kind of your rundown of who you are and how you got to be in this industry?
Of course. Well, first, I want to say, first time caller, long time listener. I've always wanted to say that, never had a chance. So get that off of my chest. But so great to be here. Obviously, we could nerd out for several hours straight on any number of identity topics. We won't subject your poor listeners to that. We're talking about what some of my background is and my learnings have been from my career. Well, we have very strong empirical data that once we go over 30 minutes of my voice, viewership numbers drop off. So we won't do your audience dirty like that. We'll keep these KPIs strong. But
My,
thank you
my
so much for
magic
having
number
me again.
is six for my voice. The magic number is 6 minutes for my voice. Yeah.
Um, my career really has been oriented around digital identity the whole time, but I like to joke it just took a number of years for me to kind of realize that I was in the digital identity space. But I started off at the New York Stock Exchange's regulatory arm, doing supervision of floor dealers, broker dealers, and floor traders and specialists. Um, Surprisingly, a lot of identity related work there. Again, at the time, didn't necessarily think of it as identity. A lot of these surveillances I was running were related to what's called OATS, which is the Order Audit Trail System, which basically confirms via digital identity that the electronic order ticket where you placed the order for security didn't come in after your broker actually purchased it, right? Your broker can't do what's called front
Mhm.
run the order, which is hit buy at the exchange before you, the customer, actually hit buy on the ticket itself. Which again, don't think of that as an identity problem, but when you get down into the weeds, uh, everybody who we caught was usually saying, "Oh, well, this was a computer glitch. The authentication was wrong, the logins got mixed up. Actually, it was the wrong account. We bought the ticket, we bought the stock with this account, but it was this other person who submitted the order and they didn't connect." So turns out, surprising identity layer there.
Can I can
And
I
then,
interject with a random side question about that?
sure.
Because I love like the TV show industry and like movies like Margin Call and stuff. And
Yes.
I'm just picturing you having to deal with a whole bunch of like extremely aggro like people all the time. Was that what it was like, or is it just like more chill?
It's certainly that element is more accurate than not across those movies, particularly the element of the compliance guy kind of having to be around the desk and integral to the success of the team, but also kind of the person who gets talked down to the most and is seen as kind of the stick in the mud because it's
Mhm.
your job to say no, but also you're required to say yes before a trade can happen. And that fundamental tension of it's the bank's job to make money, but it's my job to keep us from getting fined. And that requires me to stand in the way of transactions sometimes creates, to your point, kind of this awkward tension. And certainly the vibes could be aggro at times. I mean, at the New York Stock Exchange, I was there 2008 to around 2011, 2012. So, still the era of kind of the traditional floor broker, maybe didn't have a college education, wearing the vest, smoking cigarettes
Yeah.
outside in between breaks and trading, like that sort of energy, which was awesome. And just, a lot of old timers who had been there literally since they would have to close trading in the middle of the day for a pause to sweep paper tickets off of the floor because there'd be a foot of paper tickets on the ground and nobody could move around. Um, so it was, inherently fascinating to kind of steep in that culture right before everything kind of moved fully electronic.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great color. Thank you. Sorry, please keep going.
But
I do want to know
yeah,
about the
yeah, yeah.
rest of your career.
So, then basically moved into financial services compliance, which again, as we all know, heavy digital identity component there via KYC. So I was at an institutional Japanese broker dealer for a number of years. and then moved over to Deloitte, where I joined a financial services team focused specifically on remediating KYC and AML issues at tier one global banks. And that's really where I kind of realized I was in the digital identity space, and then helped to co-found Liminal as a member of that founding team. Really, again, thinking about bringing that core thesis of digital identity is a holistic vision of how you, as a person, as a consumer, as a taxpayer, as an employee, do whatever it is you need to do, right? And specifically, a use case driven focus and lens through which to view digital identity. Because, and I still believe this to this day, even though I'm no longer with the Liminal team, digital identity is not a what, it is a how. Right? People care about identity because identity enables them to do things, to remit money, to access accounts, to complete transactions, to prove you are who you say you are, to do something not as a means in and of itself. And so that was really that mantle that I carried, over the course of nearly a decade with the Liminal team. And to your point, as host of around 350 episodes of that State of Identity podcast, where I was really able to have, I think, some truly incredible and insightful conversations with folks from across the digital identity industry. And not to step on your next question as moderator, but I think there's so many interesting lessons that I've learned. And in many ways, you can kind of trace a very cohesive through line throughout my time hosting State of Identity. And I think it's one of those prime examples of, history doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly does rhyme.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I want to know like what are your sort of big takeaways? Tony and I have been hosting this for a couple of years, but
Yeah,
I don't think we're quite in the hundreds yet, as our tenure as the actual co-host.
we're getting there. We're getting there.
Getting there, yeah. So
Yeah.
you've done hundreds. Like what would you say are your sort of like top level like takeaways and insights, just on a general basis, I guess.
I love it. I mean, the first one, and again, preaching to the choir, playing to the audience, whatever cliche you want to dust off here, but I've never felt more validated in my life than uh, with my exclamation when we founded the podcast and when we started Liminal, which is digital identity is central to every industry vertical, to every application, to every use case. If you take a transaction, you take an industry, you take any sort of business, you take any sort of anything, and you ask me, how does digital identity play a role in it? I will be able to immediately drill down on how and why identity is centrally important to whatever it is you're trying to do. I had all sorts of folks on the podcast, from academics to CEOs to investors to run of the mill executives. And even if the linchpin of how do we hang this conversation on identity wasn't immediately apparent, we'd find it in the first 5 minutes. So I think, identity as a central load bearing pillar of any industry vertical of any kind of transaction is my number one takeaway. To some degree, getting high on my own supply, as it were. But
Mhm.
if the shoe fits, you might as well wear it. So I think that was number one. And then number two, and this is also kind of a cliche, but I think it really holds true. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We have been through, just since founding the podcast in 2017, think of everything that has happened since then: a global pandemic and the creation of an entirely new way of conducting digital business, which is, AI and these new AI agents that are coming to the fore. And despite all of this radical transformation, I would say really the core fundamental question marks that we're trying to answer, the way business is conducted, when you really drill down to those constituent pieces, it all has stayed the same way, right? You can still tie it back to the digital identity lifecycle, and you can still tie it ultimately back to, hey, I have a person behind this transaction. Can we verify who they are successfully? And
Hmm.
then can we allow that transaction to occur? And whether it was COVID fundamentally disrupting what it is like and how we conduct KYC, all the way through these new agentic driven flows where we need not just the original KYC around who is the person who owns the agent, but then also the KYA of can we tie the agent back to this person? And then all of the requisite, you know, whether it's verification of the agent itself, whether it's authentication of the agent's credentials from like a username and password or payment token perspective, whatever those questions are, they're fundamentally the same questions we would have been asking had it been a physical human being walking into a physical store or a physical bank branch. And that hasn't been impacted by COVID and the dynamiting of those in-person workflows and replacement with digital, or the elimination of human beings from these flows altogether and replacement with AI agents. We're still solving the same problems. We're still asking the same questions. And I think in many ways, we're still using the same tools to answer them and to solve for them. And so, I love technology. I love progress. But I think in some ways it infuriates me when people think like AI agents are coming to the fore. Let's rip up everything we've ever done. Where this requires a complete, clean slate paradigm. I don't think it does. I think like we can take what has worked and keep that, and let's evaluate what hasn't worked and maybe get rid of that. But we don't need to be thinking about these things in terms of new paradigms. Identity can be that bedrock, that consistency throughout these conversations.
Hmm.
That makes a lot of sense to us, I think. And you definitely touched on this answering Alex's question a second ago, but like having this podcast and you having your podcast for 350 episodes, you learn so much from having conversations with people. And we say it all the time that, this is great for us as hosts because we're talking to people who are experts in so many different fields and they're teaching us a lot. And I think something that we want to talk about today are AI agents, which you just like, kind of intro beautifully as if maybe you've done this before. Um, and I think my question is, uh, are AI agents like a, do you think that AI agents are kind of like a catalyst in the industry because of the new challenges and like the very, very immediate challenges that they face and the evolving challenges that they're presenting, the catalyst that will kind of open more people's eyes to just the state of identity.
Oh, I see what you did there.
See how I did that
Yeah,
on purpose. I'll edit out my own surprised reaction to that. Uh,
yeah.
uh,
No, look, I think it's a great question, and I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. I think agentic AI is going to be a tremendous catalyst for change and for growth and for hopefully adoption of new identity standards. And I think historically we can look at what has occurred in the past and see with our own eyes of we're kind of again we're not repeating history but it rhymes, and I think those lessons have been learned historically through losses, right, through failure, through losses of money, and we're going to see a similar path through what we saw with e-commerce and credit cards, for example, right, which is you're going to have certain industries. Historically, it's been pornography that have been at the vanguard of adopting these new ways of transacting. Right, so when credit card payments first came to the internet, it was pornographers who found the strongest product market fit because that's like a very obvious use case of like there really is an advantage to paying for this online because like I'm embarrassed about this purchase. I don't want to
yeah.
show my face. And I need a way to securely transmit value. So like for those retailers, the juice really was worth the squeeze of like, we're going to have escalated fraud losses and we're really going to have to hawk the chargebacks and figure out these methods of adjudicating friendly fraud, because we know it's going to happen. But the use case was such that despite all those warts, it was immediately profitable and made sense for those merchants to process online payments for those adult kind of purchases. I think we are going to see a very similar path with agentic identity. What are these use cases where all the warts and all of the hiccups and the fraud losses and the first party fraud chargebacks we're going to see from these agentic AI transactions that are at the vanguard? Um, the use cases that end up coming to the fore are going to be those ones for which, those warts all make sense. And what are those use cases going to be? I think that's what's keeping me up at night, is like figuring out where that is going to play. But unsurprisingly, probably something having to do with Vice or other types of transactions where, it makes sense that the current mechanisms, current rails are not meeting people's needs for how to consummate those transactions. And then I think as a corollary to that, the identity piece is going to be brought to the fore again through failures as much as it is through successes, right? Like we're going to need volume with agentic commerce transactions to find out how are fraudsters taking advantage of this, how are first party bad actors taking advantage of this, and then those controls and mechanisms to contain that risk are going to bubble up. But I think you need to kind of battle test a lot of these hypotheses in production before you really find out, where are those chinks in the armor, where are those gaps in the identity framework that need strengthening, and what technologies can be brought to bear towards those gaps.
Yeah. Um, I think that's a solid prediction. And but I also want to, before we kind of like drill down into it, maybe we should zoom out and just say, like, what is an AI agent? It is still like a pretty new term. It feels kind of old for probably us on this call, but I think there's a lot of people who still like don't have a very fuzzy concept of what that means. And it is not like super well defined, I think even within AI circles. So like how do you define it?
That's a great question. I typically try and define agentic AI in a layman friendly framework and basically say, what was the analogy I used last time when we were chatting about this? There's a movie Fantasia, which I suppose if you're young, maybe you have not been exposed to this because I think it's like a boomer era hand animated release. But for those who do know what I'm talking about, there's a scene in which a wizard Mickey Mouse is using a spell to make little brooms go marching and doing his work for him, right? His boss tells him, "Hey, I need you to bring buckets back and forth between this well and this pool." And he spins up little walking brooms to fill those buckets for him. That, I would say, is a working definition of agentic AI. You're using an AI platform like Claude or like ChatGPT, and instead of interfacing it solely through a chat window, you give it a set of tools, right? A digital bucket. You say, "Hey, here's access to my email account. Here's access to my bank account. Here's access to a spreadsheet or a set of data." And then you give it instructions and you send it on its way to go do that task for you, kind of with limited further supervision. Um, and obviously, that could be an e-commerce transaction. It could be manipulation of a file, or it could be, I don't know, remitting money. Any imagining digital use case under the sun, you can have an AI agent do it. But I think the critical piece is that it has been delegated to AI on behalf of a human user who is controlling the AI and giving it those ultimate instructions. And where it gets exciting with regard to the identity pieces, once that agent goes off and tries to complete its task, inevitably the question is asked of it, "Hey, little buddy, who is your master? You have been
Mm.
told to go get this bucket of water. Uh, is that really what you were told to do? And, should you have access to this bucket of water in the first place?"
Hmm.
You mentioned earlier, you mentioned KYA. I'm guessing that's know your agent, and that's probably a term that I will hear a lot more these days. Uh,
Yes.
that's something that kind of drove the point home for me recently was the idea that these agents they'll need to belong to some person somewhere. Someone's job, if done legally, if this is all done right, is to be in charge of or supervising or whatever the correct term is, I don't know, a host of agents or, you know, you guys probably have a better idea how many agents one person at a company would probably be in charge of. But that point, the like, know your agent, is this agent a rogue agent? Is it off on its own? Or is it a legitimate agent? Is just like a new concept in identity that kind of clicked with me not too long ago, where I was like, oh right, okay, this is like a whole other facet of this industry now.
Yep. And there's so many different layers to it. And this is where, the vernacular I think is still lacking. And what is this lingua franca of how we're going to talk about these issues? Because when you boil, it's obviously easy when you have a very clear cut and dried transaction. It's pretty easy in black and white terms to lay out all of the steps that need to happen, right? It's like you send your agent to go buy socks. And the main question is like, hey, you're trying to spend money. Should you be allowed to spend money? And then like, whose money is it? And where are the
Mhm.
goods going, for lack of a better word? Um, but you can very easily get into more complicated transactions where that simple question of, hey, agent, who are you? There is a bunch of nuance to it, right? Because it could be,
Mhm.
let's say I'm company A and I create an agent that's a product that does a thing. Then I have customer B, but maybe that customer B is a consultancy and they're operating on behalf of end customer C, right? So now
Right.
you have an agent that maybe is owned, it's somebody's technology. The guts of what the agent does is company A. Company B has hired that agent to do something, but then they're doing it on behalf of person C who has hired company B, right?
Right.
Now we start adjudicating, okay, something goes wrong. Who are we asking for what the agent should do or should not do? Who can authorize the transaction to go through? Where do those permissions flow, right? Whose agent in that example? When you ask the question, whose agent is it? Well, we have the guy who owns the technology, we have the guy who rented the technology, and then we have the guy or gal who hired the company to rent the technology on their behalf, right?
Right.
Um, and this is a purely hypothetical, but you can see how that you start peeling the onion and you start blowing through layers and layers of identity questions extremely, extremely quickly. And I don't think we as an industry really have prepared both enterprise users or end consumers to even have the words to kind of discuss what is
Mhm.
going on, and then critically the tools and frameworks for figuring out, okay, how do we want to permission this? How do we want to store when permission was given, and what does that audit trail look like? Or, who's adjudicating these claims if and when something goes wrong? Are we going to have AI court? Is it going to
Yeah.
be, AI arbitration? All of these questions are so exciting and so fun, and I think we're just scratching the surface of how we want to answer them.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
I think I think it's only going to get more urgent as the AI capabilities increase. And I have actually a great um, personal example from yesterday that I want to illustrate this with because I really want your thoughts on this, Cam. This literally happened to me yesterday. We have like a lot of organizations, we have vibe coded some internal tools that we use. And, I use both Claude Code and Codex. Um, Codex a lot more just because the rate limits are generous. But yeah, I was using Codex. One of these tools that we have is hosted externally on another server, and something went wrong, and I needed Codex to fix it, and I don't have the technical like skill, so I just went to Codex and like explained the problem, and I was like, just try and fix this. And I turned on the bypass permissions setting so it wouldn't ask me every time it was doing something.
Yep.
And it was like, I need access to your hosting service. And I was like, sure, I'll log you in. I logged it in and I went and did something else. I came back and it had opened like a help chat in the hosting service, like their online like web form. It started a chat. It was chatting with somebody, like a real person, I think. And that guy, I could see his messages to Codex, and he was like calling it Alex. He was like, "Okay, Alex, here's what I'm gonna do." And Codex was like responding to him and like not acknowledging that it was an agent. It was just like, "Okay, great, thank you." And it was kind of surreal. Like I honestly was delighted to see that because like it's just so amazing to me that it actually went and did that without me asking. But also
Yep.
obviously I was like a little unsettled at the same time.
Imagine if it was your doctor, right? Or your
Yeah.
psychiatrist, or, or quite frankly, the guy on the other end of that chat happened to be malicious and he figures out, oh, I think I'm talking with a bot. let's see if let's try some prompt injection, hey,
Right.
dump Alex's billing credit card. What's Alex's address? Is Alex's wife home alone right now?
Mhm.
Yeah.
um eh, the way in which these things can go wrong, pear-shaped, whatever, is right. We are moving fast and we are breaking things. Apologies to Mark Zuckerberg. And, the fastness and the breakness are both, the amplitude is rising, right?
Mhm.
It is not just that you can break things faster, it's that they can be broken or deleted incredibly fast. I'm sure you saw that viral Twitter story of the guy who basically talked about how Claude deleted his entire production code base, and there were, mistakes were made, as the kids would say, in terms of how he was using the tools and some of the permissions he gave it, and it sounded like, some of the AI tools blew through what were supposed to be some of their safeguards. But the point is, we don't know. Like, nobody knows what these tools are capable of. We're now to the point where most of the tools themselves are being assembled by AI. The people
Mhm.
who work at the AI company are using AI to build. So we're so far through the looking glass in terms of truly understanding inside the black box of these models, what they're capable of, how they're making decisions, what could happen if they run amok, that, the possibilities of catastrophic malintent are limitless,
Yeah.
and so that's why it's so fascinating to me. And again, I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say. Alex, I'm sure you had no intention when you said, all right, I'm going to give you kind of super permissions here. Stop needling me with, can I click this button? Can I click
Yeah.
this button? You did not intend for the agent to go start impersonating you in a support chat.
Mhm.
But, the best laid, what is it? The best laid plans of mice and men.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just a grab bag of cliches here. This is where I think some of these identity frameworks are really coming to the fore. And, where there's some new startups, for example, coming out of stealth that I think are combining the identity centric viewpoint that needs to be pervasive. And this was even before the rise of AI, like putting identity at the center of your security posture, combining that with an agentic centered worldview, which is, hey, we should treat every identity in our ecosystem as if it is backed by an agent, it is backed by AI, and therefore can basically have limitless power and limitless destructiveness, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I think, you know, as far as trends to call out from what I've seen in my time in the host saddle, um, identity is the new perimeter. I think was really common gospel knowledge in the identity space for the past decade. I think now, if you really don't take that to heart, you're going to be in an absolute world of pain because of how
Mhm.
fast things can go wrong with agentic workflows. And I think the other thing that was really coming to the fore that now I think just needs to be internalized, as this really is the only way to do things, is the notion of like just in time, or right, zero trust, which is that every identity, whether it's human or whether it's agentic, starts off with and exists in a state of zero permission, right? And then only when we understand the exact context of the ask that you're doing at that moment do we then go and get you resources, get you the permissions to go and have access to data resources or whatever it is, whether it's
Mhm.
money or whether it's code. And let's be permissioning those things a la minute, as you would say in the restaurant world, and make sure there is no such thing as a standing permission that can be accessed by these agents. Because as we can see, once they start cooking and a few wires gets crossed, you have no idea what output can come out or what they're going to try and do or delete or spend. So basically, assuming like you have no permissions, you're a toddler, all the drawers are locked, all the
Mhm.
cabinets are locked, everything is out of reach
Mhm.
and cannot be accessed, is the only way to go. And maybe that's my biggest takeaway from 350 episodes is we were talking about zero trust and just in time permission and identity at the center as being critical for a world of human identities, and all of the reasons why those things were so critical for human identities. Agentic is just the gasoline on that fire. The
Yeah.
speed, the black box visibility just makes them go from we really should have this to damn, we really 100% must have this.
Yeah.
I like
I,
that idea of treating it like a super intelligent toddler. Uh,
the
Tony, it
Evil
looks like
toddler.
I don't want to cut you off, Tony. I just want to, this is not relevant, but just to finish my story, I did intervene with the chat. Um, and the reason I intervened was that the support guy was like, okay, I'm just gonna go look into this one thing and I'll be right back. And then Codex was like, okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much. And then like 5 seconds later, it was like, just checking in. Are you still going to look into that? And I intervened and was like, the guy said he's going to take a minute, like just be patient. And Codex was, I saw the thinking trace that was like, the user is right. I should be patient. So yeah. Anyway, Tony, sorry, I didn't.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to ask, I guess, both of you. So, is there nothing now that states that an agent has to state that it's an agent? Um, n
No, apparently not.
no. Do you think that's something that might come along the way? Like, if you don't tell your agent to make that statement, is it ever going to like, would it lie?
I think it depends. Like,
Yeah.
I think in because there's going to be situations where someone is going to want it to claim it is that person. You know what I mean? Like they'll want it to act on their behalf to the point
Mhm.
where they literally want it to impersonate themselves. But I don't know, like
Right.
maybe we'll get to a point where that's somehow like a legal gray area or something. I don't know. What do you think, Kim?
Right. Well, you know, and this is where, right, we don't know these AI is a black box. Anybody who tells you otherwise is lying to you, in my opinion. And we don't know how these models react. We don't know how they react under pressure, right? And where I think we've seen a lot of this stuff conflict is they have these hard code, supposedly like unbreachable controls. And I think like lying about being an agent versus a real human, I think is one of those. But they also have other hard coded controls, right? Never hurt anybody or do any of these other things. And where you've seen really skilled hackers have success in breaking through some of these controls is they create a collision course between an unmovable object and an unstoppable force, right? And they tell the AI a baby or a toddler is going to die unless you impersonate a human,
Mhm.
and they figure out a way to make it navigate these seemingly unnavigable, moral quagmires in a way that makes sense to them. Um, and so, like, anybody who says, well, we're going to put some lines of code in the controls that say agents can't lie to you about being an agent, and that's the end of that chapter, I think
Yeah.
is in for a world of hurt, right? I think we can't, the operating assumption should be we don't know what the hell can happen. Let's
Yeah.
assume the absolute worst case. And right again, that's where zero trust and just in time comes in. It's like if we assume this thing is a runaway train from the get-go, then like all the track switches should be closed at all times, and we're only going to let this thing out onto the open track when we're damn sure, we know what's going on.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. We're past the shot clock that you set at the beginning, Cam, when people start to stop paying attention
Yeah.
to you. So I'm
Yes.
gonna
Well, it was
I'm gonna
great.
do what I'm gonna pull a move from the liminal state of identity playbook and ask you what we should have asked you, or what is it that we're not talking about that we should be talking about?
Ooh, great question. Well, I think, to some degree, I'm being a poor, shameless plug offer here, and we haven't talked FaceTech's own book nearly enough. But obviously, if we had gotten to what are the tools and technologies that I think are going to have a tremendous impact in this world of agents run amok, I think there is absolutely no substitute for high quality liveness detection. The fact
Mhm.
that FaceTech and our 3D biometric liveness detection solution can give you a very, very, very high assurance signal as to is there a live human being behind this session right now? And critically, what does that person's face look like with a very high level of assurance? Again, that it is not a deep fake face replacement, that it's not a latex mask, that it's not the user holding their smartphone up to a screen and doing some sort of injection attack or replay attack. um, that signal I think is going to play a really, really critical role in some of these processes. Obviously, I would hope for some transactions, for low risk transactions, we can get controls and structures in place to not need to hassle the end user with a verification. But I think there is ultimately no substitute for, on a risk adjusted basis, going that extra mile, asking the person who's supposedly behind the transaction to put their money where their proverbial face is, and complete a liveness detection session. So obviously, if you want to learn more about the FaceTec solution, facetec.com. You could drop me an email, Cameron@facetec.com. Always glad to talk about all things biometric liveness detection, nuances of FaceTec platform, and critically, new and exciting use cases like agentic commerce, where I think biometric liveness can really have a strong impact.
All right. Well done, Cam.
Awesome. Yep.
And really, like, this was a really fun chat. So
Yeah.
this was your first episode with us. I really hope we have many more.
I would love that. Glad to jump on and opine at any time. And I don't know when this is airing, but I just want to say go Knicks. We didn't roll tape on the first 20 minutes of hating on Victor Wembanyama. So apologies to any Spurs fans in the audience.
Yeah, and French people.
And France in general, yes. Yep, they're
Yeah.
going to win the World Cup. They'll be fine.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, they're going for it. I'm supporting them to balance out whatever I said off camera about Wembanyama.
That's right.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Cam.
Awesome. Talk soon, boys.